The Dark Knight is considered to be by many the greatest Batman movie ever made. And while I don't share that opinion myself, I can certainly understand it. It's a superhero movie that even Martin Scorsese could watch and call cinema. It is one of the most brilliant and beautiful outings the character has ever seen on screen. Being skillfully shot, expertly directed, and filled to the brim with unforgettable performances that turned mere men into immortals in the annals of time. For better or worse, these films informed the general public on the character during this time period, and it's had an effect on how these characters are played even today. While the trilogy as a whole could be credited for the revitalized Batman craze, much more than the previous and later entries in this trilogy, I think most of that could be and should be attributed to this film. It is one of the greatest Batman movies of all time, it is one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, it is one of the greatest movies of all time. The Dark Knight sets itself up for success. As a story, it's crafted using the scraps of other iconic Batman stories that had already been out at the time. If you're familiar with the comics, the influence is quite clear, as the movie wears its inspiration on its sleeve. The Joker's choose-your-own-adventure backstory is indicative of the character's philosophy in terms of his origins, as described in The Killing Joke.
Sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes another. If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice.
You know how I got these scars? So I had a wife. One day they carve her face. So I stick a razor in my mouth and do this. My father was a drinker and a fiend. He comes at me with the knife, sticks the blade in my mouth. Let's put a smile on that face.
He said it was the circus.
He's got a million of them, Harley.
The Batman copycats are drawn directly from The Dark Knight Returns, which had a gang that was Batman-inspired, with the Sons of Batman.
This is the face of the future. Let Gotham's criminals beware. Gotham City belongs to the Batman.
That wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I said I wanted to inspire people.
But where this movie draws most of its inspiration from is Batman: The Long Halloween, sharing a lot of the same major characters and story beats, with some scenes in the final film being panel-by-panel, shot-for-shot recreations. The scene the three protagonists share on the rooftop certainly comes to mind. In The Long Halloween, Harvey's injured and horribly disfigured mid-trial. That moment is almost parodied here and used as a reference and red herring to the character's origin. Both that comic and this movie depict Harvey running for office with the same slogan.
I believe in Harvey Dent. Yeah, nice slogan, Harvey.
And both stories showcase his transformation and transition into Two-Face. I wouldn't say that The Dark Knight is an adaptation of any of these comics. I would say that it just so happens to share some of the same DNA as those famous Batman stories. And personally, I've always appreciated this type of storytelling more than straight-up adaptations with some alterations. I'd rather someone tell their own story with other pre-existing stories in mind. The Dark Knight does a good job at juggling these pre-existing elements to tell its own tale, which extends to the movie's relationship with the mythos. It does its own thing with it. And I would say that this one deviated far more from the source than the first film did. There's a change made going from Batman Begins into The Dark Knight. There's a lot of changes from the first film to the second, whether that be due to the passage of time in-world, or changes in creative outside of it. The Batman suit gets an upgrade that in some sense kinda could feel like a downgrade. I've never loved the Batman suits in these movies, but then again, we're coming off the heels of a set of movies that decided to give the suit nipples, so you take what you can get and you just smile and grit your teeth. Though to be fair, this change does make some sense in world, as it allows Batman to be more mobile and move around, which I imagine is sort of a necessity in the crime-fighting gig. I think what I really appreciate about this suit upgrade the most is that it legitimately looks like protective gear, and when you're out doing hero work, you gotta stay protected. Even when you're not out doing hero work, you should still probably stay protected. because you never know when there's villainy afoot, which is why I've partnered with ExpressVPN, a brand that's dedicated to protecting you even when you're not in costume. ExpressVPN protects its users by encrypting their data and funnels it through their secure servers, preventing internet service providers from monitoring, logging, or even selling your data to advertisers, which they're legally allowed to do in the US. ExpressVPN keeps users' browsing activities incognito, making sure their identities and information stay private. But that's not all it does, as with the simple click of a button, it can connect you to a server in any one of 105 different countries, and grant you access to region-specific content. Like for example, when I'm frantically searching Netflix for one episode of Friends I just so randomly happen to remember, but then I also not so randomly remember that Netflix doesn't carry Friends anymore where I am, well, now that's no problem, as I just take a quick flight over to the UK, and hey, would you look at that, Friends? Can it be any more easy? So to sign up and get your first 3 months free, head on over to expressvpn.com/Infuso. I mean, that's 3 months of free superhero service. I would take that deal. As a matter of fact, I already have. Now, what was it I was talking about again? Oh yeah, I'm sure budget plays a part in it, but what I really want to highlight here is its presentation and philosophy. This is going to be hard to explain, but hear me out here. Batman Begins felt like it was a Batman story on a big budget, whereas The Dark Knight felt more like a big budget movie with Batman in it. The first film had this feeling of griminess and grittiness to it that the later movies never replicate. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even feel like they try. The atmosphere is altered in between films. Even Gotham City itself feels completely different from the cesspool the first movie centered around. Crime and corruption still run rampant in the city, but visually speaking, the place sure looked cleaned up. The city loses its identity in between installments. No longer is this the slums. It's just any other generic city. This always bugged me, because I enjoyed that environment from the first film so much, and ideally, I think that's the type of chaotic habitat I'd want to see the Joker in. Especially this Joker. While the stakes are raised, the lens in which we see this world feels like it's been sanitized. I'm not trying to take away from a movie that was an instant classic before it even hit theaters. I'm just saying as a Batman fan, I preferred Batman Begins' interpretation of The Dark Knight more than The Dark Knight's. While the city may have lost its personality, the people of the city have not. As a matter of fact, they've really upped the ante on that front. The returning characters and cast are still just as incredible as they were in the first flick. Alfred is still a sage, Fox is still a confidant, Commissioner Gordon is still Batman's partner in crime, but you know, like on the good side of crime. Everyone is still the same.
What about
everyone? Though Christian Bale's Batman voice has gotten noticeably more gruff and become considerably less decipherable. I stand by the fact that this character wasn't as nearly parodied before this installment. While almost all of the previous movies' leading characters return, not all of the actors do, as Katie Holmes would be recast with Maggie Gyllenhaal, who never really comes off as the same character. The only two things these characters share is a name and a hairstyle. Maggie somewhat matches her predecessor's energy, but she plays the part completely different. Both actresses worked in the part, but there was never a lot that was asked of this part to begin with. Rachel is a pretty bland love interest who felt more like a plot point than she did a person. I do think Maggie gives a much stronger performance, and kinda gives the character a little bit more personality than Katie does, but the character isn't written to make an impression on anyone but Bruce, and Harvey in this case. I also think the inclusion of Harvey exposes the character, as she was kinda created from the ribs of that villain, serving the same position in the wider plot and in our main character's life, though it's a considerably different type of relationship. Harvey Dent is one of the movie's new additions, a man whose future is foreshadowed by his own speeches.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
The man seems to have it all. He's charismatic, he's charming, he's a symbol of hope and a face of change the corrupt city desperately needs. It's White Knight to Gotham's Dark Knight. Speaking of which, Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent have a very complicated relationship here. As Batman, he scouts the district attorney out to learn about where his moral compass leads. At the end of the day, you really have to question if Bruce's interest in Harvey is to see if he's good enough for Gotham or good enough for Rachel. And I think if we're answering that question honestly, it's a little column A, a little column B. I do think it's telling that the vigilante seems to make peace with losing his city, but never with losing Rachel. At one point, pretty much giving up one in exchange for the other. Even if he portrays the scenario much more selflessly, reasoning that Harvey is the hope that Gotham needs, I think on a much more selfish and personal level, this was a ploy to try to win back Rachel, his only means at a normal life. In spite of Dent being an unsuspecting personal rival, professionally Bruce respects him. He sees a potential future for the city under Dent's watchful eye, but he also sees a future with Rachel should Harvey get into office. While I definitely prefer the more traditional route of making Harvey and Bruce friends before becoming forever foes, I do think changing their history and making them rivals works well with the narrative at hand. Especially because you still get the feeling that they're somewhat cut from the same cloth. The movie's constantly comparing and contrasting these two. Even the smaller cogs in the machine work here, with even some of the more minor parts in this movie being distinct and identifiable, which is a huge upgrade from the last installment where everyone was a generic gunman who were really only around to be temporary obstacles. The criminal underworld has a distinct identity, with no two criminals being exactly alike, though each role is expertly cast. The new head of Gotham's criminal underworld is played by Eric Roberts, who was really just put on this earth to play a sleazy bad guy. He may play the same part in everything that he's in, but he plays that part to perfection. Also worth noting is that this is now the second comic book movie that sees Michael J. White feud with a psychotic clown. David Dastmalchian makes the first of many appearances in a superhero continuity, playing a follower of the Joker. Fun fact, this is not even the only time this actor would play a follower of the Joker. Talk about being typecast. The Scarecrow even makes a surprise cameo at one point, and it's completely unnecessary, but it is not in the slightest bit unwelcome. But all of this is just window dressing that pales in comparison to the pale-faced highlight of the movie. The highlight of all these movies, really. That, of course, being Heath Ledger's take on the Clown Prince of Crime. Before this movie was even out, it was clear what the selling point of this movie was. The ads hardly showed Batman and only emphasized the Joker. The Joker isn't just scene stealing. He stole the whole show. Something that even the actor playing the titular character has admitted to.
Heath Ledger, who, oh my God, you know, what a performance. I'm feeling a little bit dull by comparison, because Heath is just like killing this. Very talented individual and a great soul to be around.
I know I've been critical on this take on the character, but my criticisms are based solely on how accurate of an adaptation it is. As a performance, I don't think there's an argument that can be made against how incredible this was. The Joker character from these movies was so monumental, it overshadowed the franchise it was a part of. It's the role that these movies are most remembered for. It's the role Heath Ledger will most be remembered for. Without question, more than any actor that has put on the paint before him or after him, Heath Ledger left the biggest impact and has had the most influence on the Joker character. Ledger loses himself in the paint. So much so that when he's on screen, there's hardly a trace of the man playing him. The decision to stay away from an origin story or anything grounding the character in some semblance of humanity was a good call. I love that audiences weren't let into the character's roots. He is as much of an enigma to audiences as he is to peers. No name, no identification, no humanity. I also like the Joker's motives seem to change midway through the movie. Like, he has his own plans, but he just got bored by them. At first, he's simply acting out chaos for the sake of chaos, but he becomes obsessed with the city's protector, desperately trying to break him, to get him to see his way of thinking. When I claimed Heath Ledger's Joker wasn't the definitive Joker, it didn't mean that Heath Ledger's Joker wasn't a great Joker. It just meant that he was uniquely his own. You see, when it comes to the Joker in The Dark Knight, there are definitely parts of the character in the performance, but for the most part, he comes across like a completely different and wholly original character. Gone is the sixth sense of humor, his incredible comedic timing, his schemes in the names of puns and punchlines. And in their place is a criminal who is as chaotic as he is colorful. Heath Ledger's Joker doesn't carry the character's personality, but he does carry the character's philosophy. He has his own set of mannerisms, but he does share the same motives and motivations. But there is so much originality to this take on the villain that I think it should be acknowledged as Heath Ledger's Joker specifically, because there truly is no replicating this clown, even though many other clowns have tried over the years. Lightning doesn't strike twice. This was a once-in-a-lifetime performance that any talented actor, if asked, would fail at recreating. This was a once-in-a-lifetime performance by an actor willing to take a risk, daring to be different. You see, he didn't fill Jack's clown shoes, because they wouldn't have been a good fit. Instead, he wore his own custom pair, and in wearing them, he didn't follow in Nicholson's footsteps. He walked alongside him to a point, and then eventually he just took his own path. Even if he wasn't the character from the comics, Heath played not only one of the greatest Jokers, but one of the greatest villains in movie history. There have been things that I've always questioned about this movie. Like, why have an on-screen police department filled with original characters that are just seemingly stand-ins for already existing ones? You're gonna tell me that this dude isn't Harvey Bullock? This being only one movie after this dude isn't Harvey Bullock? Either would work depending on which route you're choosing to go with the character. Either man could have been, but neither are, and this series is left without a Bullock. And Detective Ramirez could have very easily been Renee Montoya, though allegedly I hear that she was intended to be. But given her later portrayal, it was felt that it was the wrong move to portray the character in that light. Again, allegedly. I've made videos in the past talking about how I felt that this movie was misinformed when it came to some of the characters. But I think the truth of the matter is, it intentionally neglected some of the characters' characteristics and characterizations in lieu of telling its own tale. Telling a new story with an old pre-established brand. And if I'm being honest, I don't think the changes made here are a slap in the face to the source material. They're just different. And from a creative standpoint, I really appreciate that. Even if from a lifelong fan standpoint, I prefer something closer to what it is that I'm a fan of. Regardless of everything, this movie truly is a masterpiece, and it deserves every bit of praise as it's gotten over the years, and then some. Truth be told, I don't really enjoy it as a Batman movie, but I absolutely love it as its own thing. So with all that being said, that was The Dark Knight. And if you enjoyed my take on this movie, and want to see a video on the last installment in this trilogy, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
The Dark Knight needs me.
I am vengeance. I am the Knight, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.